A global injustice forced sterilizations in the 20th century. The 20th century witnessed a dark chapter in human history. Forced sterilizations. Governments across the globe, driven by flawed ideologies and discriminatory beliefs, enacted policies to prevent certain groups of people from having children. These programs, often cloaked in the language of public health or social progress, targeted the most vulnerable members of society. From the United States to Nazi Germany and even seemingly progressive Scandinavian countries, forced sterilizations left an indelible mark on millions of lives. These programs were not isolated incidents, but rather reflected a global trend of eugenics, a pseudoscience that aimed to improve the human race through selective breeding. This dangerous ideology took root in different parts of the world, leading to the enactment of laws that permitted the forced sterilization of individuals deemed unfit to reproduce. This essay will explore the history of forced sterilizations in the 20th century, examining the motivations behind these programs, the experiences of those affected, and the ongoing fight for justice. This dark chapter of history serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of human rights and the importance of vigilance in protecting the most vulnerable members of society. By understanding the factors that led to these atrocities, we can work to prevent similar abuses from happening again and create a more just and equitable world for all. The fight for reproductive justice continues, demanding recognition, accountability, and a commitment to upholding the inherent dignity of every human being. The roots of eugenics: breeding a better human. The eugenics movement, which gained traction in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, played a pivotal role in legitimizing and fueling forced sterilization programs worldwide. The movement's central premise, deeply flawed and inherently racist, was that human traits like intelligence, criminality, and poverty were primarily inherited. This dangerous ideology led to the belief that society could be improved by preventing those deemed unfit from reproducing. Proponents of eugenics argued that selective breeding, much like with livestock, could eliminate undesirable traits and create a healthier, more intelligent, and more productive society. They advocated for policies like marriage restrictions, segregation, and most chillingly, forced sterilization to achieve their goals. These ideas found fertile ground in societies grappling with rapid social and economic changes, providing a seemingly scientific justification for existing prejudices and inequalities. What began as a fringe movement quickly gained influence, infiltrating academic circles, political platforms, and even popular culture. Eugenics societies sprung up, promoting their ideas through books, pamphlets, and even fitter family contests at state fairs. This widespread acceptance of eugenics as a legitimate science laid the groundwork for the implementation of forced sterilization programs that would target the most vulnerable members of society. America's Dark Secret: From Buck v. Bell to Modern Echoes. The United States, often perceived as a beacon of freedom and individual liberty, has a long and troubling history of forced sterilizations. Starting in the early 20th century, states across the country began enacting laws that allowed for the forced sterilization of individuals deemed feeble-minded, insane, or likely to give birth to defective children. These laws disproportionately targeted marginalized communities, including Black, Indigenous, and Latina women, as well as people with disabilities and those living in poverty. The landmark 1927 Supreme Court case, Buck v. Bell, solidified the legal basis for forced sterilizations in the U.S. In this deeply disturbing ruling, the court upheld the constitutionality of Virginia's sterilization law, allowing for the forced sterilization of Carrie Buck, a young woman falsely labeled as feeble-minded. This decision, which has never been overturned, set a dangerous precedent that paved the way for the sterilization of tens of thousands of Americans. While many states have formally apologized for their eugenics programs, the legacy of this dark chapter continues to haunt the nation. Shockingly, forced sterilizations in the US did not end with the horrors of World War II. Reports emerged in the 1970s of forced sterilizations targeting Black women, particularly in the South, often without their full consent or understanding of the procedure. These abuses sparked outrage and led to federal regulations aimed at preventing such practices. However, recent allegations of forced sterilizations at an ICE detention center in Georgia underscore the unsettling reality that these practices may persist even today. Nazi Germany, racial hygiene, and the Holocaust's shadow. The most horrific example of forced sterilization in history unfolded in Nazi Germany. Driven by their twisted ideology of racial purity, the Nazis implemented a systematic program of forced sterilization targeting anyone deemed a threat to the Aryan race. This included Jews, Roma people, individuals with disabilities, and those deemed politically or socially undesirable. Between 1933 and 1945, an estimated 400,000 people were forced to undergo sterilization procedures, often in horrific conditions and without their consent. The Nazis justified their actions under the guise of racial hygiene, a pseudo-scientific concept rooted in eugenics that aimed to eliminate undesirable traits from the German population. They believed that forced sterilization, along with other measures like forced abortions and euthanasia, was necessary to create a master race and rid Germany of those they deemed a burden on society. The Nazi sterilization program was deeply intertwined with the Holocaust, serving as a precursor to the genocide that would claim the lives of millions. Many of the individuals subjected to forced sterilization were later murdered in Nazi concentration camps, demonstrating the horrific progression from forced sterilization to mass murder. The atrocities committed by the Nazis serve as a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked hatred and the catastrophic consequences of eugenics taken to its logical extreme. This dark chapter of history stands as a stark warning against the dangers of scientific racism and the importance of actively combating all forms of discrimination and prejudice. Section 5. Scandinavian countries, a complex history of welfare and control. While often lauded for their progressive social policies, Scandinavian countries also have a complex and troubling history of forced sterilizations. Starting in the 1930s, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark implemented eugenics-inspired programs that resulted in the forced sterilization of thousands of individuals. While the stated goals of these programs varied, they often targeted marginalized groups, including people with disabilities, ethnic minorities, and those deemed socially undesirable. In Sweden, for example, the sterilization program was justified as a way to improve public health and reduce the burden on the welfare state. However, the program disproportionately targeted women, particularly those from poor backgrounds or with physical or mental disabilities. These women were often pressured or coerced into undergoing sterilization, with many not fully understanding the irreversible nature of the procedure. Similarly, in Norway and Denmark, forced sterilizations were used as a tool of social control, targeting individuals deemed unfit for parenthood or likely to produce inferior offspring. These programs reflect a darker side of the Scandinavian welfare model, where the pursuit of social progress sometimes came at the expense of individual rights and autonomy. In recent decades, Scandinavian countries have begun to reckon with their dark past, issuing formal apologies and providing compensation to victims of forced sterilization. However, the legacy of these programs continues to spark debate about the balance between individual rights and the role of the state in shaping society. Section 6. Targets of sterilization, vulnerable groups and intersectionality. Forced sterilization programs across the globe shared a common thread. They disproportionately targeted the most vulnerable members of society. While the specific groups targeted varied depending on the country and historical context, these programs consistently preyed on individuals and communities lacking power and often facing intersecting forms of discrimination. People with disabilities were among the most frequent targets of forced sterilization programs worldwide. Fueled by the eugenics movement's obsession with eliminating perceived defects, individuals with physical, intellectual, or mental disabilities were often deemed unfit to reproduce. These programs reflected deep-seated prejudice and ignorance surrounding disability, viewing disabled people as burdens on society rather than individuals deserving of equal rights and opportunities. Racial and ethnic minorities also faced disproportionate targeting for forced sterilization. In the United States, for example, Black, Indigenous, and Latino women were sterilized at alarming rates, often without their full consent or understanding. These programs reflected the intersection of racism, sexism, and classism, targeting women of color who were already marginalized and facing systemic barriers to the healthcare and economic opportunity. Section 7. The fight for justice, reparations, apologies, and recognition. In recent decades, there has been a growing movement to address the legacy of forced sterilization programs and provide justice to survivors and their descendants. This movement encompasses a range of demands, including formal apologies from governments, financial reparations for victims, and the creation of memorials to honor those who were forcibly sterilized. Several countries, including Germany, Sweden, and Norway, have taken steps to acknowledge and atone for their past actions. They have issued formal apologies, established compensation programs for victims, and created public memorials to commemorate the suffering inflicted by these programs. However, the process of achieving justice has been slow and uneven, with many survivors and their families still awaiting recognition and redress. In the United States, the fight for reparations for victims of forced sterilization has gained momentum in recent years. Several states, including North Carolina and Virginia, have established compensation programs for survivors. However, many survivors and their advocates argue that these efforts are insufficient and that a national program is needed to fully address the scope of this injustice. Section 8. Never again: safeguarding human rights and informed consent. The history of forced sterilization stands as a stark reminder of the importance of safeguarding human rights and ensuring that all individuals have the right to make autonomous decisions about their bodies and reproductive lives. The atrocities committed in the name of eugenics underscore the dangers of allowing prejudice and discrimination to guide public policy and the urgent need to protect the most vulnerable members of society. To prevent similar abuses from happening again, it is crucial to promote education and awareness about the history of forced sterilization and the dangers of eugenics. By understanding the factors that led to these atrocities, we can work to dismantle the systems of oppression that made them possible and create a more just and equitable world for all. Upholding the principles of informed consent and bodily autonomy is paramount in all healthcare settings. Individuals must have the right to make decisions about their own bodies, including whether or not to have children, free from coercion, pressure, or discrimination. This requires ensuring access to accurate information about reproductive health, providing culturally sensitive care, and addressing the power imbalances that can make it difficult for marginalized communities to exercise their reproductive rights. Section 9. Conclusion. Forced sterilization programs represent a dark and shameful chapter in human history. Driven by flawed ideologies, discriminatory beliefs, and a thirst for social control, governments across the globe violated the fundamental rights of millions of people, from the United States to Nazi Germany and beyond. These programs left an indelible mark on individuals, families, and entire communities. The legacy of forced sterilization continues to resonate today as survivors and their descendants grapple with the physical, emotional, and social consequences of these injustices. The fight for justice continues, demanding recognition, accountability, and a commitment to ensuring that such atrocities never happen again. By confronting the dark history of forced sterilization, we can learn from the mistakes of the past and work towards a future where the dignity and autonomy of every individual are respected and protected. This requires a collective effort to dismantle the systems of oppression that make such abuses possible and to create a world where all people have the freedom to make choices about their bodies and their lives.